This was not one war or one disaster in one place. It was a wave, a cascade of destruction rolling across the entire interconnected world, toppling its cities one after another. And the most chilling fact of all is what did not happen next. In so many of these places after the fire, there was no rebuilding. The cities simply died, and the silence that followed them lasted for centuries. The kingdoms fall, the great powers vanish. For the great powers themselves, the collapse was not a setback. For most of them, it was the end. The Hittite Empire, one of the two superpowers of the age, a state that had stood toe-to-toe with Egypt, simply ceased to exist. Its mighty capital, Hattusa, was abandoned and burned. Its great fortifications left empty on the highland plain, its royal line extinguished. An empire that had lasted for centuries was gone within a generation, so thoroughly erased that for a long time the modern world forgot the Hittites had ever existed at all. The Mycenaean civilization of Greece collapsed. The palaces fell and were not rebuilt. The kings and their scribes vanished. The whole sophisticated, palace-centered society that had produced the heroes of legend came apart and disappeared. And even Egypt, the one great power that survived only barely and was never the same. Rameses III did manage, according to his own account, to defeat the Sea Peoples in a great battle and keep them out of the Egyptian heartland. But the cost was crushing. Egypt lost its empire in the Levant, lost its wealth and its reach, and slid into a long, slow decline from which it would never fully recover. The age of Egyptian greatness was effectively over. In the space of perhaps 50 years, the entire system of great powers that had ruled the Eastern Mediterranean for 3 centuries was swept away. The connected world was finished. The Great Forgetting, the Dark Age. And what came after was a Dark Age. In the fullest, most literal sense of the word, nowhere was this clearer than in Greece. When the Mycenaean palaces fell, something almost unbelievable happened. The Greeks forgot how to write. The script their scribes had used simply vanished with the palaces that needed it. And for the next several centuries, Greece was illiterate. The art of writing would not return to Greece until hundreds of years later. The Greeks borrowed a new alphabet from the Phoenicians, the ancestor. In the end of the very letters on this screen, it was not only writing. Population collapsed. Trade withered to almost nothing. The grand palace economies, with their specialists and their scribes and their long-distance commerce, were replaced by smaller, poorer, simpler worlds, villages where people scratched out a living and built nothing monumental for generations. The lights of an entire civilization went out, and the memory of the world that had been lost survived only as legend. The Greeks of later centuries looked back at the ruined citadels of Mycenae and Tiryns, at walls so massive they could not imagine human hands had built them. And they told stories of a vanished age of heroes, of mighty kings and a great war at a city called Troy. The poems of Homer, sung centuries later, were the distant, half-remembered echo of this lost Bronze Age world. A real civilization, fallen so completely that it had passed out of history and into myth. The great question, why? The suspects. So we come at last to the question that has obsessed historians for over a century. What caused it? What could possibly bring down an entire interconnected civilization, all at once and so completely? For a long time, the easy answer was the Sea Peoples, invaders who simply smashed the kingdoms one by one. But the more we learn, the less satisfying that answer becomes. The Sea Peoples may have been a symptom as much as a cause. And raiders alone, however fierce, do not usually erase an entire advanced world and keep it down for centuries. So scholars have searched for deeper forces, and they have found several suspects. The first is climate. There is now strong evidence, drawn from ancient pollen, from lake and sea sediments, from the chemistry of the past, that the Eastern Mediterranean was struck, right around 1200 BC, by a prolonged and severe drought, years of failed rains, shrinking harvests, and in a world of growing cities dependent on reliable agriculture, drought means famine, and famine breaks everything. The second suspect is the Earth itself. The region sits on dangerous fault lines, and some researchers have argued that this period saw a cluster of powerful earthquakes, what they call an earthquake storm, striking city after city across a span of decades, toppling walls and palaces already strained by other pressures, The third is the people within. Hunger and hardship breed unrest. Some scholars see in the destruction not only outside attackers but internal collapse, rebellion against the palace elites, the rigid ruling classes who hoarded the grain and the bronze while ordinary people starved. The perfect storm, the modern answer. And here is where the modern understanding arrives at something more unsettling and more profound than any single villain. Because the emerging answer is not that one of these things destroyed the Bronze Age world, it is that all of them did. At once, picture it as a chain of falling dominoes. A long drought weakens the harvests across the whole region. Famine spreads. Hungry, desperate populations begin to move and to fight. Earthquakes shatter cities already under strain. The long, fragile trade routes, the very threads that carried the tin and the copper and the grain, begin to break. And once they break, the bronze supply falters, and the wealth that held the kingdoms together drains away. Displaced peoples, refugees from collapsing lands take to the sea and the road and the sea peoples, adding their own violence to the chaos. Rebellion flares against the failing elites, and the rigid, centralized, hyper-specialized palace systems, which had no flexibility and no fallback, simply shatter under the strain. This is what scholars call a systems collapse. The Bronze Age civilizations did not fall because of one catastrophe. They fell because they were so tightly connected, so specialized, so dependent on one another, and on a fragile web of trade, that when several shocks struck together, the failures cascaded. Each collapse triggered the next. The very interconnectedness that had made the world so rich and so brilliant was the thing that allowed it to come apart all at once. A perfect storm, striking a system too rigid to bend. And so it broke, is out of the ashes what survived. And yet this was a collapse, not an extinction. The human story did not end at 1200 BC. It was reset. And out of the ashes slowly new things grew, some of them perhaps only possible because the old world had burned. Consider the metal itself. The Age of Bronze, which depended on that long and broken tin trade, gave way to the Age of Iron. Iron is harder to work, but its ore is common, available almost everywhere, with no need for fragile long-distance trade in rare tin. It may be no coincidence that as the bronze trade collapsed, humanity turned in earnest to iron. The catastrophe that destroyed one age helped to forge the next, and in the long silence after the fall, new peoples found room to rise. The Phoenicians, those master traders of the Levant, spread across the Mediterranean and carried with them their alphabet, the writing system that would seed the Greek and Latin and so much of the world's script to come. In the hills of the Levant, new groups emerged, including the early Israelites. And in Greece, after centuries of darkness, the Dark Age finally lifted, and out of it came the Greece of Homer and the philosophers, the classical civilization that would shape the entire Western world. The Bronze Age collapse swept away an old order, but it also cleared the ground. The world that grew back was different, and in time, it would build wonders of its own. Here's the warning, reflection. There is a reason the Bronze Age collapse haunts us more, perhaps, than any other fall in history. And it is not just the scale of it, or the mystery. It is the resemblance. Here was a world of advanced, prosperous, deeply interconnected societies, a world bound together by international trade, by shared technology, by long and complicated supply chains, by a confidence that the system was simply too big and too sophisticated to fail, a world whose people surely could not imagine that it might all come apart. And it came apart anyway, quickly, completely, and for reasons no single person at the time could see, because the causes were tangled together across the whole vast system at once. Historians who study this collapse tend to draw the parallel deliberately, and it is not hard to see why. The lesson of the late Bronze Age is not a comforting one. It is that complexity is not the same as stability, that the more connected, the more specialized, the more interdependent a civilization becomes, the more efficient it grows in good times, and the more catastrophically it can fail when several things go wrong at once. A web is strong, but until too many threads are cut. The first connected world believed it was permanent. It was wrong. And in 3,000 years, every connected world since has believed us in hook. Around the year 1200 BC, the world ended. Not the whole world, but a world. A brilliant, connected, sophisticated world that had stood for centuries and must have seemed to the people living in it as permanent as the sun. A world of mighty empires and golden palaces, of kings who wrote letters to one another, of merchant ships crossing the sea, of writing and law and bronze, and then in the span of a single generation, almost all of it was gone, one after another. The great cities of the eastern Mediterranean were burned to the ground, and most of them were never rebuilt. Empires that had dominated the region for hundreds of years simply ceased to exist. Kings vanished, trade routes died, whole writing systems were forgotten, so completely that the people who came after could no longer read, populations crashed, and a darkness fell across the ancient world that would last in places for centuries. It was the closest thing to an apocalypse the ancient world ever knew, the first time a complex, international civilization collapsed all at once. And here is the strangest part. After more than 100 years of digging, of reading burned tablets and toppled palaces, of testing theory after theory, we still are not entirely sure why it happened. This is the story of the late Bronze Age collapse, the fall of the first connected world, and the greatest unsolved mystery in all of ancient history. The connected world, the world that was lost. To feel the weight of what was lost, you first have to see the world that existed before. For roughly 300 years, from about 1500 to 1200 BC, the Eastern Mediterranean was home to something the world had never seen at this scale. An age of great powers, living side by side, locked together in trade and diplomacy and war. Historians sometimes call it the first age of globalization, and in many ways that is exactly what it was. There was Egypt, at the height of its glory under the pharaohs of the New Kingdom, the Egypt of vast temples and god-kings. There was the Hittite Empire, ruling from the highlands of what is now Turkey, the only power that could meet Egypt as an equal. There were the Mycenaeans, the warrior kings of Bronze Age Greece with their fortress palaces and their golden masks. There was Babylon, and the rising power of Assyria in Mesopotamia. There was Cyprus, rich in copper. And strung along the coast of the Levant were the great merchant cities, places like Ugarit, where the goods of every kingdom flowed through crowded harbors. These were not isolated worlds. They were a single interconnected system. Their kings exchanged letters and gifts and royal brides. Their merchants moved tin and copper, gold and ivory, textiles and grain and oil across thousands of miles. They shared an elite culture of luxury and diplomacy that bound the whole region together. For 3 centuries, this glittering web held, and it must have looked unbreakable. The bronze that bound it, the hidden fragility, but woven into the strength of that world was a hidden weakness. And to understand the collapse, you have to understand the metal it is named for. Bronze. The late Bronze Age ran on bronze, for weapons, for armor, for tools, for the trappings of power. And bronze is not a single metal. It is an alloy, mostly copper mixed with a smaller amount of tin. To make it, you needed both. Here was the problem. Copper and tin almost never occur in the same place. And tin, especially, was rare and came from far away, carried across enormous distances along trade routes that stretched, in some cases, all the way to the mountains of Central Asia. No single kingdom controlled both metals, which meant that no kingdom could arm itself or equip its people without trade. Every great power of the Bronze Age depended, for the very metal that defined the age, on long-distance commerce with people far beyond its borders. This interdependence was the secret engine of the connected world. It forced cooperation. It rewarded peace and exchange. But it was also a profound vulnerability. The whole system was a web of long, fragile threads, and a web can be strong until enough of the threads are cut at once. The civilizations of the Bronze Age had bound their survival to one another, and they had no idea how dangerous that would turn out to be. The great powers, the players at their height. In the final century before the fall, this world reached its peak. In Egypt, the pharaoh Ramesses the Great ruled for an extraordinary 66 years over an empire at the summit of its power, raising colossal temples that still stand today. To the north, the Hittites commanded a vast empire from their mountain capital, and the 2 superpowers, Egypt and Hatti, fought one of the most famous battles of the ancient world at Kadesh, then signed what may be the earliest surviving peace treaty in human history, sealing it with a royal marriage. Across the sea in Greece, The Mycenaeans were at their height, the warrior civilization whose memory would echo down the centuries as the world of the Trojan War. From mighty citadels like Mycenae, with its great lion gate and Pylos and Tiryns, their kings ruled over a society of palaces and scribes, recording their goods and their gods on clay tablets in an early form of Greek, and binding it all together were the trading cities of the coast, none more important than Ugarit, a wealthy, cosmopolitan port where merchants from every kingdom met, and where scribes kept meticulous records on thousands of clay tablets. It was a world of staggering achievement, confident and rich and stable. Its people had every reason to believe it would last forever. It had, in fact, less than a generation to live. From the last letters, the world in its own words, and we know how it felt to live through the end, because in their final days they wrote it down. This is one of the most haunting things about the Bronze Age collapse. Unlike so many vanished worlds, this one left us its own voice, frozen at the moment of catastrophe baked into clay. In the ruins of Ugarit, archaeologists found the city's final correspondence, and it reads like letters from the edge of the abyss. In one, the last king of Ugarit writes desperately to a neighboring ruler, describing enemy ships that have appeared off his coast. According to the tablets, he reports that the enemy has already burned his towns and done terrible things in his land, and, fatally, that his own army and fleet are far away, in the territory of the Hittites, leaving the city undefended. He is begging for help. He is asking if anyone is coming. No help came. And here is the detail that turns the story to ice. Some of these final tablets, it is said, were discovered in a kiln, where they had been placed to be hardened and then sent. But the city was overwhelmed and destroyed before they could ever leave. The messages were never delivered. They survived only because the fire that consumed Ugarit baked the unsent clay hard, and buried it and kept it for 3,000 years, a cry for help, preserved by the very disaster it was trying to escape. The sea peoples, the great mystery, those enemy ships off the coast of Ugarit point us toward the most famous and most mysterious figures in the whole story, a name that has haunted history for over a century. The Sea Peoples. Our clearest account of them comes from Egypt. On the walls of a great temple built by the pharaoh Ramesses III, there are carved images and inscriptions describing a terrifying enemy that came against Egypt by both sea and land, a confederation of different peoples, moving together, with their families and their belongings piled in ox carts, as if they were not merely raiding but migrating, looking for somewhere new to live. And the Egyptian account of what these people had already done is chilling. It describes them sweeping away the great kingdoms one after another, declaring in effect that no land could stand before their arms, and naming the powers that had already fallen before them. According to the inscription, the Hittites and Cyprus and the cities of the Levant were laid waste, their land swept clean, before this tide finally broke against Egypt itself. But who were they? Where did they come from? And this is the great frustration. We still do not really know. The names the Egyptians gave them have been linked tentatively to peoples of the Aegean, of Anatolia, of the central Mediterranean, but nothing is certain. Were they invaders who caused the collapse? Or were they themselves refugees, victims of the same catastrophe? Displaced peoples driven from their own ruined homes and set wandering across a dying world. The Sea Peoples may be less the cause of the apocalypse than its most visible symptom. They remain history's great anonymous wave, the faceless force that came out of the chaos and helped to end an age. The wave of destruction, the collapse itself. Whatever its causes, the destruction itself is not in doubt. Because the cities tell the story in a language of ash and ruin that needs no translation. Across the eastern Mediterranean, in the decades around 1200 BC, archaeologists find the same terrible signature again and again, a layer of burning, a horizon of destruction that stretches across an entire civilized world. City after city, from Greece to the Levant, shows the same thing. Violent destruction, collapse. Around the year 1200 BC, a whole world of kings and palaces, of letters and treaties, of merchant ships and golden masks and bronze, went into the fire. The great cities burned and were not rebuilt. The empires vanished from the earth. The writing was forgotten. The survivors scattered into a dark age, and the brilliant connected age that had come before passed out of memory and into legend, surviving only as the dream of a lost world of heroes. For 3,000 years we have been sifting the ash, reading the last unsent letters, trying to understand how something so great could fall so far, so fast. And the deepest lesson of the first great collapse is the one no civilization has ever truly been willing to learn: that no world, however rich, however clever, however certain of its own permanence, is ever safe from the thing that waits in the end. For all of them, the cities became mounds, the kings became myth, the connected world became a silence that lasted 1,000 years.